about 90% of people do not actually have moral, ethical, or logical foundations to what they believe, that they pretty much just inherit their beliefs from the people around them or from their parents. They will essentially follow the people around them off the edge of a cliff. Why Schindler's List?
To be honest with you, it's proclaimed to be one of the best movies ever made, and I've never seen it. But I also have an enjoyment of World War II history and all the things that went on during World War II. So, I mean, it seemed fitting.
Sure. I also had not seen it before, and Will, you hadn't seen it, right?
I had not seen it.
Which is kind of interesting. Three people who all enjoy films have never seen Schindler's List, one of the most famous films, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of top 100 movie of all time lists place this in the top 10 consecutively. So you're not going to hear much from me in the way of critiquing the actual film because in a lot of ways it's a masterpiece. So I'll be interested to see where this conversation goes.
I don't think it would make it to a top 10 for me, but I can see the craftsmanship that went into it. I mean, it's Steven Spielberg. He doesn't really miss with movies that he directs. He's missed with a lot of movies that he's produced, but generally, if he's the director, he's going to do a good job. And there's a reason why this film is so famous. It stood the test of time, and it's just well crafted.
I didn't know Liam Neeson was in it, so that was kind of a welcome surprise. I did know the movie was filmed completely in black and white, and I was curious about that because I don't think I've ever liked a black and white movie. But I think for what Steven Spielberg was going for, I thought the black and white fit perfectly, and it felt like it was such an older movie. Like I literally thought this movie was from the '70s, and then
I did too, which is probably part of why I had never seen it.
Yeah, and I was doing research on it and realized it came out in '93. So
Yeah, this film was filmed in the noir style, which was popularized in the 1940s, which is fitting because the film is set primarily in the 1940s. And I do think it works very well. The black and white was a nice touch. It makes the film feel timeless. You could watch this 100 years from now, and it would take you right back to 1940, whatever. So I think that was a very good touch that Spielberg added. It wouldn't have felt correct with color, in my opinion, because I think the black and white sort of highlights the lifelessness and inhumanity of the time period that it's attempting to showcase. It makes it feel more gritty to me.
It is gritty, and it's worth pointing out that they didn't. It's not like they filmed in color and then just turned it black and white. There's been a lot of films that have done that as, just a stylistic choice, like, oh, we'll make it black and white. And the
Sin
issue is
City.
that, yeah, when you film in color, you're not taking the right things into consideration. And it just isn't going to look as good when you turn it black and white. When you start with real black and white film, which is what they filmed on, and you're mindful of that throughout the filming process, you can tell that this was shot with genuine black and white film, but not like super old, 1950s, like grainy, not very good looking film. I mean, it's nice film. It's high quality. And the lighting really was striking me throughout the movie. Like, you can tell that they were being very intentional with their lighting to have maximal contrast in every shot, which that's what black and white needs, is lots of contrast.
It looked good. It looked really good. It was like the whole entire film was a smooth cigarette with a little bit of bite.
Yeah,
this comes
I
from a guy who's
definitely,
probably never smoked cigarettes in his life.
in the beginning of the film, I was a little bit worried about. I'm not a huge historical film guy. There are some that I really like. There's a lot that are famous and people love that I just don't really enjoy them. I don't really go to historical films on the reg, and especially older ones. And so I was a little bit worried, but when this film opened and it's in the sort of like the nightclub scene, where just the camera movements, the way that everything was sort of like almost orbiting, the camera was just orbiting whatever it was filming, and Poruna Cabeza was playing, which is just fantastic. And I was like, okay, this movie has taste, and I think I'm going to enjoy it. Um, I will say one of my major critiques of the film would be that I do think it is probably too long. Um, Despite how much it impressed me at the start, and there are many moments throughout it that impressed me, and I think it ended great as well. There's a part probably in the first third that just had like a half hour of too much content, where there just wasn't that much happening. That's my opinion. I don't know if you guys agree.
I think it was too long in the beginning. I think the first act of the film was a bit too long. It's weird though because I think it was necessary to fully set up Schindler's character arc because they have to show him as a capitalist Nazi party member who loves money and loves women. He's a womanizer. He's very attractive to other people, and I think that they have to show him going gradually from that to what he eventually becomes at the very end of the film. And that takes time. If they would have rushed that, it wouldn't have had the same effect. Like you said, Alex, for me personally, it was a bit too long. They could have maybe shaved 15, 20 minutes off, but for the character arc, I do think it works.
I would agree
Well,
with both of you on that. I thought the movie was long too. There was a lot of filler in the beginning, but again, like you said, Will, I agree that filler was for character development because Schindler took a complete 180. It didn't seem like he cared about Jews personally at the beginning of the movie, and then I guess they grew on him. I like to blame the girl in the red coat was his turning point.
yeah, I definitely think that it's intended to be his turning point, but this is my number one critique for the film probably would be, personally, I think that Schindler's character arc is not fleshed out very well. Um, and maybe it would change on a rewatch, but the impression that I got was pretty much for the first half of the film, he's basically entirely heartless. He's just completely in it for the money. He does not care one bit when the Jews have the right to own businesses taken away from them. He doesn't care one bit when they're cooped up in ghettos and, basically living like 8 people to a room, and they have no civil liberties at all. He doesn't care in the slightest. The movie doesn't give him any like empathetic traits or qualities at all. And then there's this one scene where he sees the actual extermination beginning, and the guards rounding up all the Jews in the ghetto and just shooting willy-nilly, and he sees this little girl in a red coat. And from that moment on, for the rest of the movie, he's just like 100% like a saint, basically. And I feel like it's so drastic, it's such a quick turnaround. I think in reality, there was probably a long period of a very conflicted Schindler that we don't see in the movie.
Okay, I agree with that last part you said.
I
I
would
do.
say
I think that the conflicted nature of the real Schindler could not have been encapsulated by the film. So I agree with that. But there are other scenes. It's not just the girl in the red coat. And quick side note on that. So I do have difficulty seeing color, and I don't know what it was about this film. I didn't see any red. So I did not get that effect from that scene. I didn't even perceive it because I could not see the red. And I even went back and I looked and I
Wow.
couldn't see the red. It just looked like black and white to me. So, um, so that part aside, No, there were other moments where Schindler was shown as being colder and more on the heartless side, and then he sort of warms up a little bit, like with the his Jewish worker, the older gentleman who had one arm, who at first, when that guy comes to thank Schindler for letting him work in the factory, Schindler's like so disgusted by his presence. He's like, Stern, how can you let this one-armed man in my factory? Why, don't ever do that to me again. Do not ever make me interact with him again. And then later, when that gentleman is killed, Schindler confronts the Nazi officers that were responsible, and he's like, "You will pay me back for this man. He was one of my best workers." So that's just a subtle hint that Schindler, these his Jewish workers actually mean something to him, and he isn't going to stand for them just being murdered. Like they're not just a number for him at that point. They are growing on him. So I did like the inclusion of that scene, and you do know what scene I'm referring to, right?
I do. I think I myself was a little bit conflicted on how to feel about some of his actions when he was in that transitional period where he was, being upset with soldiers for trying to take his workers and using the justification of, well, they're my workers, I need them, I'm making a profit off of them. The thing is that he actually was at that point still making a profit off of them, and I couldn't really tell to what extent he was being truthful in the reason for him being upset with the soldiers. But I think you're probably right that they were hinting towards him having a little bit of empathy towards his workers. Um, it's there. It's just I just don't think there's nearly enough of it to be like a especially considering they had 3 hours. I just don't over 3 hours. I don't think that they really showed the transition very well. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but I looked briefly into the historical accuracy of the movie because I'm always interested in that for historical films, and overall it gets high marks from people for historical accuracy. But one of the things that people do critique is they say that scene where he sees the girl in the red coat, that never happened. He didn't actually see the rounding up and slaughtering of Jews in the ghettos. He saw some other things at different time periods, but so that one key pivotal moment in the movie is fabricated, and that's just where I feel like, yeah, this had to have been a much longer and more drawn out process to change someone so much, to go from such a heartless, womanizing, greedy, just worthless human being to a very sacrificial and selfless person.
You mentioned the historical inaccuracies, and I looked into them as well. And to me, they almost completely ruin the film itself, like 100%. And that's what I think is so unfortunate about historical nonfiction. And in this case, it's a historical nonfiction film based on a historical nonfiction book based on a retelling by someone. So it is far removed from actual historical documentation. And I mean, the title of the film is Schindler's List, and historical fact is that he never compiled a singular list. That there were 5 or 6 different lists compiled by different people, and unfortunately, a lot of those lists had to do with the names got on them due to bribery or favoritism or just other scummy things like that. And Schindler himself did not even really have much to do with the names that were on the list, if anything at all.
See, that's interesting because that doesn't bother me all that much. Like I ran across the same thing, that it wasn't really Schindler that compiled the list himself, but to me that's not like such an important detail. The movie simplified it and maybe dramatized it a little bit, but the fact is that there were lists created to pull people out of concentration camps, just as everyone was essentially being shipped to Auschwitz to be incinerated, and the people on those lists were sent to Schindler's factory, and they survived.
Right, but we're talking about the sainthood or the supposed sainthood of Schindler himself. You know, he did not compile the lists, and then eventually, after the war was over and the Schindler Juden were a defined group of people, he essentially came back years later and said, um, I came up with this list. I'm the only reason you're alive. Now, like I kind of need you to financially support me because I'm not able to support myself anymore because I helped you. And they did. He was actually supported financially by those same Jews for basically until his death. And there's not, look, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the Schindler in the film is not portrayed that way at all. He's not seen as somebody who's going to come back and be like, you owe me this because I helped you. But in real life, it's seeming like that was the case. Now, I'm not saying that morally he is bad for that, but in the film, they make Schindler seem like he's the second coming of Jesus Christ, and that's not an exaggeration. Like in the second half of the film, he is a like Christ-like saint. But that's just not the case in real life. Real life is always much more, muddy waters than some fictional portrayal. And it's the same here, just like most other places, most other historical nonfiction films.
I agree that they probably give him a little bit too much sainthood, especially going along with my earlier criticism. I just think it comes kind of out of nowhere, and it's just so much of it, and it's such an extreme change where it's just kind of not believable for the character presented in the film. Like, what comes to mind for me is the fire hose scene, where he is like, it's a hot day and there's all these people in the train cars that are just basically scorching to death, and in front of all these very important Nazi officials, he just starts being like, "Okay, we're gonna get water and we're gonna get this car. They need more over here. They need more over here." Like, obviously putting himself at huge optical risk in front of all these people. Um, that scene just came across to me as like, that may have happened or something similar may have happened, but the character that I've seen in this film, I just cannot imagine this coming from him. Um, Bringing it back though, I don't really quite understand why does it have to have been Schindler that created the list himself? Why does that make such a moral difference for him as a historical figure?
Because, and I probably should have added more context, but the list itself was the names that actually got on the list were primarily through bribery or favoritism or someone knowing someone. So that'd be the same as if like people were being rounded up from, my hometown, and all of like the cool connected people with businesses and stuff got on the list and they got to be saved, and then all of the downtrodden people with no connections or no money just fucking get turned to ash. Like, I don't know, I do kind of have a problem with that, especially when you take that same list. And look, I understand that it's a drastic situation, but you're making a movie about that list that makes it seem like Schindler was just like, no, we need this name and this person will live and this person will live and this person will live. Even like that's not even close to what happened. It was just like all the people with connections who bribed. There's a specific like Jewish officer who was being bribed for your name to be on the list. And I don't know. I don't think that's okay. I mean, there were a lot of people that died because they didn't have enough money to bribe this guy based on what I've read. And I can provide sources in the comment section. I feel like I'm going to have to do that.
Nothing that you said like changes anything about Schindler's motivations to me. Like, I don't
The
see why
movie's
he would
called
need to have
Schindler's
like
List.
personally known. Well, obviously he didn't need to know every single person on the list. He didn't know over 1,000 Jews personally in the movie when he, compiled that list with the help of his assistant. Like, that wasn't just like all of his friends. It was everyone he could possibly think of, plus everyone that his assistant could possibly think of, and then they were just like going through lists of people. I can believe that they chose not to show in the movie things like bribery happening because it doesn't look good. But that doesn't, like, that's human nature for there to be favoritism and bribery going on when there is an out of, people are dying and there's an out, people are going to use whatever means necessary to use that out. Why does that change Schindler's status?
Well, it clearly changes his status because in the film, I mean, we're on the same page about him seeming like unrealistically saint-like within the film. And the fact that in real life, he probably did just have much more, you know, capitalist-minded motivations that didn't really have to do with saving human beings. Look, I'm not saying that. See, this is getting into more of like interpretation of historical text and historical documentation rather than anything that I can know concretely. So, yeah, I don't know. The only point I'm trying to make, and that I think you agree with, is that Schindler in the film and Schindler in real life are drastically different people on drastically different ends of the moral spectrum. Real life Schindler
Different
more
ends
morally
of the
gray.
moral spectrum. So
No,
you
no.
think
I was about to say Schindler real life more morally gray. Schindler in the film Second Coming of Jesus.
I think almost every figure is to some extent morally gray, but I think I would, my opinion would be that a person who did what Schindler did had to have had some good intentions, because he sacrificed a lot to do what he did, and he risked a lot to do it.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
don't think he didn't have good intentions. No, he had good intentions, but it's just not what the film is showing. Like the film essentially, like what's the word where you like package something up and make it look as pretty and glamorized as possible?
well, they Hollywoodized it. I mean, that's
Okay,
probably
okay,
not the
that
word you're
works.
looking for,
No, no,
but
no, that works. That works completely.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. I just don't, I don't think that, uh, I haven't seen anything to really like besmirch the character of the historical figure Schindler all that much.
Yeah, I think that we're sort of like not on the same
How about
page
you,
because I'm
Kevin?
not
Any
really
thoughts
saying
on this
besmirch.
conversation?
I'm just saying things that I found out in terms of historical context, sort of, you know, because you watch the film, that's your only ever viewing of Oscar Schindler, and you're like, wow, he was like this. And then you read history, and you're like, okay, let's bring it a little back towards the center, more realistic. And that's kind of where I'm at. That's the only thing I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but they do that with all his. I mean, most historical movies, they're going to add a little bit of drama effect to it, so they're going to change the story to fit the narrative. Like I did a little bit of that research. You found the same information you did. The real Schindler was nothing like they portrayed him in the movie. What he did is still the same thing, but how he did it is not the same. And one of the scenes in the movie that reminds me of, or that's probably closer to who he really was in real life, was when he was talking with, I think it was Ishtak he was talking to, when he's talking about it was cheaper to use the Jews than the Poles because they actually had to pay the Poles, the Polish people. And that's probably more along the lines of the who the real Schindler was.
I mean,
I
like
didn't,
we
yeah, I
have to
didn't like him in
remember
that moment.
he was a member of the Nazi Party, and that doesn't. I'm just saying, like anything he did to help who he helped is like a monumental feat. So I'm not discrediting that, and let's be clear about that. But I'm just saying, real life is different than fiction. Just in the same vein, um, you know, we haven't even talked about the main antagonist of the film at all. And I feel like it's probably time for him to come in. So, Amon Goth was the commandant of the newly constructed camp. He's the foil character of Schindler within the film. So, Schindler is almost, you know, I'm trying to pick my words so carefully, man. Schindler is very, very good. Goth is very, very, very bad. So within the film, I think it works that they make Schindler like uber, uber good. And because he sort of has to contrast with this Nazi commandant who's just like murdering people and a sociopath and like has no, like, he doesn't seem stable whatsoever. So if we're talking about purely film, it works because of the antagonist.
Goth seems like he's probably closer to the real life historical Goth than Schindler is to the real life Schindler. Um, I read a little bit of some interviews of people who were around Goeth and in that camp, and yeah, he was legitimately just like he would just shoot people for fun or at random, or he would. I read that one time he shot 2 SS guards for not finding 2 escapees, which that's pretty crazy. But yeah, he seems like a total psychopath in real life, and they probably did a pretty good job conveying him in the movie.
You know, one thing that is unique about this film that I want to give it credit for is we have a clear protagonist and a clear antagonist, and they're complete foils of each other. So you would assume that they're just at this constant in this constant warring state, but they're actually, you know, they maintain a fine relationship throughout the entirety of the film, and they never really have any conflict, and you know they remain cordial. And obviously, underlying that's not what's going on. That's not what's going on in Schindler's mind, but it's just very interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I actually think it works for the film. And like their constant dialogue and their constant, you know, different philosophies meeting each other. Like the scene where Schindler is trying to talk to Goeth about what real power is, and that power is not just indiscriminately killing people. Power is the ability to show restraint and the ability to show control, essentially. I thought that was a very powerful scene. So yeah, like their constant interactions were very entertaining and very unique.
Yeah, I also read that after the war, Goeth was convicted for being responsible for 8,000 deaths, him personally. I think particularly something that I was thinking about while watching it, and I've been thinking about since, is just the way that groupthink and sort of just, yeah, group mindset can go so far. A group of people can be led into such twisted ideas. This is something that will probably come up more in later videos if we have more like philosophical or I don't know, debate oriented conversations. But I am of the opinion that about 90% of people do not actually have moral, ethical, or logical foundations to what they believe, that they pretty much just inherit their beliefs from the people around them or from their parents, and they will essentially follow the people around them off the edge of a cliff. I have grown to believe that very strongly. And so it's interesting to me, I guess, because the story of the German people, I don't believe that the German populace compared to, say, the American populace in World War II was like inherently more evil. Or that, you know, just the average person in Germany had like these inherent hateful ideas. I think it's more so that just they just like Americans are mostly sheep. They were mostly sheep, and they had a really, really bad shepherd. And it's just unbelievable how far it got. But I think it's really worth acknowledging and reminding ourselves consistently that that is what happens. The Holocaust is what happens when one group is given too much power.
So do you think power is the determining factor there, or do you think it's something else? Because I would probably push back against it being too much power. I don't think that's the factor.
Well, I think I mean, there's so much that goes into it, but what I mean when I say that is that I essentially view populations as largely being like unthinking people who will essentially do and think what they're told to do and think. There are exceptions. That 10% pulls a lot of weight and they make a lot of noise when they're allowed to. But what happened in Germany was, of course, okay, the Nazi Party was elected in 1933. By the end of 1933, the German people had lost the freedom of press, the freedom of speech, the freedom to protest. The secret police, the Gestapo, were going door to door asking neighbors to rat on their other neighbors if they didn't like the Nazi Party. Hitler had been given totalitarian dictator powers to do whatever he wants without Congress approval. What happened in Germany was that, a small group of people with really, really bad ideas were able to take 100% control of that nation. And the people followed. Now, yes, there were a lot of people in Germany who did end up, doing good things like harboring Jews or sabotaging the Nazis. Those people were there. But by and large, that 90% of the population that doesn't really think just went with it. And that's why such incredibly horrific things were able to happen. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, but you listed a bunch of ways that the people lost their voice and had power stripped away from them as if they would have tried to go against the Nazis, and you made it seem like it wasn't even possible for them to fight back in any meaningful way, except for the small instances where they could. And then your conclusion was that 90% of them were just mindless sheep following the leader when the parameters you set, the historical context is that they were essentially neutered and could do nothing even in the face of this power that was, the secret police and the Nazi Party itself, and they were also looking in the face of death and terror. So we're like, are you trying to say that, are they mindless sheep who just go along with their leaders, or were they forcibly silenced and, kind of forced to endure what was happening? So is it both at the same time, or what do you think?
It's both at the same time, and a way I could clarify it is if 90% of the population were not mindless sheep, if 90% of the population were moral, ethical, thinking beings, then as soon as their rights were being stripped away in 1933, there should have been absolute chaos and uprising, and the Nazi Party should have been overthrown. And the Nazi Party wouldn't have been able to staff their own, you know, SS, Gestapo, and they had a lot of people in the military who were not just passively standing by as atrocities were happening and civil rights were being stripped away. They were actively doing it themselves and reveling in it. And that wouldn't have been possible if most of the population were ethical thinking beings. So what I'm saying is, I believe that same population that made up Germany in the 1930s, the same problems that exist there exist in pretty much every population that has ever existed, and it certainly exists in today's. And so I just think it's worthwhile to be aware that people can go down very dark paths and believe really crazy things as long as they get the okay from essentially groupthink, from people around them doing and thinking the same things.
Right. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I disagree with that. I don't think I do. But like with the Germany World War II specific example, there's a lot of things that we kind of have to bring up. I think one very, very important thing, it wasn't like the German people were just, living in harmony with Jews before Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power. There was, ethnic clashes and ethnic resentment between the groups for decades beforehand. And it wasn't just that the people, they were like, okay, we're voting for this Hitler guy and the Nazi Party. 6 months in, oh, they actually hate the Jews. We didn't expect that. That's out of left field for us. I mean, the whole anti-Jew thing was a sentiment that was held by that population for a while beforehand. So with that, and I'm not saying that they wanted them all dead because I actually don't believe that's the case. I don't believe the average German person was like, yes, I want their men, women, and children dead. I don't think that's the case. But was there rising ethnic conflict between the Germans and the Jewish people? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I agree with that. But the thing is that, like, the feelings that the German population had towards the Jews, I feel like that's almost the last of what should have been their worries in 1933. Like, what ended up happening to the Jews 10 years down the line, yes, ended up being far worse than probably anyone imagined, even the people who were anti-Semitic at the time. But that's not really what should have concerned you. Like, if you're a German citizen and Jews are being, rounded up in and forced into ghettos, your number one concern should not be the fact that Jews are being rounded up and forced into ghettos. Should be the concern that if you speak out against it, you'll be killed. That should probably be more of like a red flag that you're living in a bad place. If you're literally afraid for your life, if you even in secret, in privacy, tell someone that you don't like the Nazi party, that they might go to the Gestapo and rat you out, and you'll end up rotting in a prison somewhere, possibly tortured and killed. That that is just like
yeah,
that's kind of what I'm getting at.
yeah, I think I'm having a misunderstanding because it sounds like your initial argument was the people will do anything no matter how bad it is if everyone around them is doing it. And then like what we just talked about for the past 5 minutes was again saying they were forced to do it with the threat of death. And I think those are like two drastically different things. So if I'm just not understanding you, I apologize, but that's kind of like what I'm having a little bit of a barrier with.
I feel it probably leans more towards the
Yeah,
first one.
yeah. If I can try to elucidate, I can use the United States as sort of an example of the antithesis of what I'm saying is the problem with Germany. So I'm saying, okay, all populations have this problem, which is that people will do whatever the people around them are doing. The remedy to that, the antidote to that, is always having sources of tension in your populace and in everything, in your government, in any departments established by your government. There needs to be essentially opposing forces which keep each other in check. It's checks and balances, right? So the reason that the United States doesn't fall apart is not because um you know people know what they're doing and they're rational good human beings. It's because the left and the right are in conflict with each other in such a balanced way that as soon as one starts to take over, the other side gets really mad about it and gets more support, and it stays in the middle. It's a constant tug of war that keeps us from doing anything crazy. So what I'm saying is the reason that such atrocities happened through the Nazi Party is because they were able to remove that any possible opposition that could have arisen in Germany, and that's basically what happened. Does that make any more sense? Yeah, I'm saying that people are sheep, but there are exceptions, and the the exceptions can have a very loud voice if they have the ability to use that voice. And also, if you have multiple groups who may both be equally irrational, but if they hold each other in tension, then it has the effect of a combined rational group. Um, and both of those things were taken away in Germany. They removed any opposing parties, and they removed the right to protest or say anything against what the Nazi Party was doing. And so that combined with the groupthink problem basically resulted in a population that was just like going down this insanity spiral of hatred and irrationality.
There are two schools of thought with how people believe the Holocaust went down. There is a group who believe that from the very beginning, Hitler knew that he wanted to create and orchestrate covert undercover death camps, and he had them systematically planned out, you know, before any of the camps even happened, before any Jews were in the ghettos, before any construction started. Hitler had this planned out from day one. And then there are the people who believe in something called the chaos theory, which is that they were originally supposed to be labor camps. The final solution was just removing them from society to do forced labor. And when Germany started to lose the war, they just, dove into madness, started killing people, couldn't support people anymore, so they starved, blah, blah, blah. And that's how most of the deaths happen. So there's the pre-planned systematic theory, and then there's the chaos theory. Which theory do you guys believe is more accurate, personally?
I would definitely subscribe more to the chaos theory, just based on the timeline. It seems pretty obvious that the initial slights against the Jewish population were still meant to serve some purpose for the Nazi Party, and it wasn't until it became pretty clear that they were losing that they started just like pedal to the metal, like just start burning them, which there was really no like logical or rational explanation for that other than just vindictive hatred and just like, well, we're going, so we're going to take them out with us. Like, that's how I see it.
I somewhat agree with the statement. I feel like Hitler had a lot of it planned out as far as the concentration camps. I do believe the Nazis needed the Jews as workforce, so I mean they didn't intend to murder hundreds of thousands of them at a time. I believe the original intention was to use them as a labor force. There were killings here and there to keep them in line, nothing drastic. And then I agree with you guys as they lost the war, they ramped up their efforts to annihilate the Jews. Of course, I wasn't there, so I don't know which one is actually closer to the truth. I just know what I've learned from history and how many people have died and how the Germans approached the situation and how they handled, the Jews in their own territories and other countries that they were conquering. This is a controversial subject, so it's always weird to hear people's opinion on it because
Well,
a
to
lot
be
of
clear,
the information.
I don't think that the answer to Will's question that he just posed should be controversial at all. I don't think that there's
Oh yeah,
like an iota of insinuation from the chaos answer that Hitler is somehow less culpable because it wasn't a initially planned. Like, I don't think that gives him any leeway whatsoever. I don't think that there should be any worry about controversial aspects to that.
yeah. I meant more controversial, as in people and how they opinionate whether you're right or wrong. Like I said, I don't know what happened and how it was originally planned out. But I do know that a lot of people were murdered. A lot of people were responsible for the murders. But yeah, I agree with you guys. I feel like maybe it was a desperation thing near the end of the war where the murders started ramping up. I
Well, I
didn't
didn't
find
even
any
really give my
research on.
opinion yet, but yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a historian. I just think it makes more sense that we were literally seeing like the gradual descent into madness of Germany, to where at first they were intending to remove the Jews from society, have them, basically be their labor force to supply the soldiers with ammunition, food, whatever. And then as they started to lose the war and their impending doom was inevitable, they were just like, okay, time to start. Like, we basically want to burn them on the way out. Kevin, this is a really, really controversial subject. I was actually kind of like when you picked this idea, part of me was like, how the fuck are we going to talk about this? Because we have to really choose our words so carefully. I don't know, man. I feel like
Why?
there's really
Why do you feel we need to choose our words?
Because this is such a touchy subject. Like, we're not historians, and
No, we're not.
we're talking about so many people's deaths that, some people might have a huge problem with the fact that we're basically saying Hitler didn't orchestrate this from day one.
If someone was to say that you're anti-Semitic because you don't necessarily think that Hitler had the exact Auschwitz plan from the day he was elected, that's just insane. Like, if someone wants to say that, they can say that, but I don't think anyone who is a respectable person or a logical person would say that.
Anyone with common sense would know that's not the case. No, I've read a lot regarding this, and I've heard opinions from both sides. There was one guy, I can't remember who he was, that I read something he wrote, and it was about Hitler. And what he was saying was, it's too bad that Hitler was a psychopath, because Hitler was a great speechwriter. He was very intelligent. He was from a leadership perspective, they say that he was a great inspirational leader. Now, the problem with the fact that he was inspirational was the fact that he inspired hate and terrible things. And I'm more of the opinion of maybe Hitler wasn't an evil guy. Maybe Hitler was bipolar or had some kind of fucking weird mental illness that, back then we just didn't recognize it and we just call him evil.
Well, I think you can have a mental illness and also be evil.
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody. I mean, now he's got the reputation as being the most evil person in the world, and I agree with it. I mean, killing millions and millions of people—that's absolutely fucking evil. But at the same time, there's a lot we don't know about. Back in the 30s and 40s. Mental health back then was unrecognizable. Nobody would say this guy's bipolar or this guy's schizophrenic or anything like that.
Yeah,
and I think along the lines. Yeah, I think along the lines of if, maybe he was a person who, made these speeches and said the problem that we're having as German people is that there's too many Jews here, and they're taking our jobs. They're hoarding all the money, and then you've got people like Alex was saying earlier who are sheep who take this and interpret it their own way and say, "Death to the Jews." So maybe killing all the Jews wasn't Hitler's idea, but it was inspired by him. That's how I feel, and I'm sure people are going to disagree with that and have issues with that, saying that
I'm not even putting that in the video. I'm serious. Okay, yeah, people are not going to like the fact that we're sitting here pondering Hitler's mental health. But the thing is, I don't think he was mentally ill. Like, you don't have to be mentally ill to come to the conclusions that he came to. That's like an easy out. Yeah. I just think he was just a guy who rose to power. Like a lot of world leaders throughout history have done fucking horrible things, and I'm not going to go back and be like, oh, maybe they were mentally ill. Like, I don't think that's even a conversation that's like worth having, because you don't have to be schizophrenic like to echo the sentiments that he echoed. That's just like not even, even if he was bipolar, like what would that really change like anything? Like, nobody's going to be like, oh, it only happened because he was bipolar. I get it now. Like, no.
Yeah, I didn't say it was a popular opinion. I just said that's, I've read things about it, and I wasn't there. I can't picture one guy saying, okay, let's kill 10 million people. I feel like it was an idea that just snowballed way out of control.
I don't think that it was even an orchestrated idea while things were still like not a madhouse in Germany. I think that, I mean, we don't know this. We don't have the historical context as Americans. We've never almost lost a war. We've never had our cities bombed and our people murdered and our men, women, and children blown to smithereens by different countries within our own boundaries. We've never been faced with like, oh, you are about to get taken over and you are about to be fucking utterly destroyed. So I think that the descent into madness that led to them just saying, fuck it, we're just going to kill everybody, that's way more understandable when you provide that context. I don't think that it has to do with their leader being bipolar. I don't think it has to do with some orchestrated plan that was like 20 years in the making. Yeah. I think it just has to do with pure fucking chaos.
Well,
shit hit the fan and that just got crazy.
I mean, you can say that it's understandable that they would start mass killing at the end of days.
No,
But
no.
there
I
were
don't want to say I don't want to say understandable. I'm going to say it's the logical conclusion of what was happening. I'm not saying understandable like I'm trying to relate to anybody. I'm just saying it's the logical
sure.
conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Watch
well,
your
the
words.
conclusion to a very long road of intentional decisions to give in to hateful ideas, to strip away rights one by one, not just from Jews, but from everyone, and to try to expand an empire to take over the world. I mean,
Well,
yeah, I
that
mean
clear
it's
they knew that that clearly wasn't going to happen. The whole take over the world thing was long gone for like years before the war ended. I mean, they were losing for a while. So, like at the same time that people were being reduced to ash and, put in gas chambers, Germany was not like, "Okay, and after this we're also going to take over the world." They were like, "Okay, we are like about to not even be a country anymore, so whatever happens happens."
well, except uh, a lot of countries have been in the same scenario, a similar scenario of losing a war and not done anything remotely similar, um, and have done a fun thing called surrendering. I guess they did surrender
They
eventually.
did surrender.
Yeah, um,
Hitler didn't.
but they did some things before they surrendered that did not help their case. I mean, it was suicidal. It essentially was suicide, mass in mass. You know, it the more atrocities you commit on your way to surrendering, the worse you're going to pay reparations by from the victors. The victors are going to be more hateful towards you. And honestly, I think it's really astonishing how gracious the Allied powers were to the Axis powers after World War II ended. It's really inconceivable to me. I don't think that I would have been capable of the grace lent to Germany and Japan and Italy in the years following World War II. It's inspirational to me how a lot of that was handled
I
afterwards.
mean,
And
like, well, I don't really know what you're getting at there. Maybe you can expand upon that. But I mean, like hundreds of thousands of their young men and innocent civilians in their countries were killed. Like I get what you mean. You're talking about post-war, like accepting them back into the world stage as players, but like they were eviscerated like beyond recognition. All three of those countries.
well, they had to be. When I talk about the Allied powers being gracious, I'm essentially saying that they had the power to, like, in completely annex the Axis powers. Uh, they could have like kept those countries down forever. They could have just absolutely obliterated their civilizations and cultures if they wanted to, and they would have been. It would have been understandable. I'll put it that way. And they didn't. And I find it so impressive that just mere decades after committing the most some of the history's most horrible atrocities, both Japan and Germany were flourishing, and Italy. It's really just impressive to me.
What would you have done personally?
Well, that's an impossible question to answer. I'm inspired by and really appreciate what happened, and it was the right thing to do. What would I have done as a leader? I don't know. It's possible that I would have been so blinded by hatred that I would have made decisions that would have made it more difficult for those countries to recover. Um, I I I don't know what I would be like as a person in a position of power. Most people are corrupted by power and don't wield it responsibly. And because I've never tried, I can't say with any confidence what I would have done.
I'm I'm honestly sort of having reservations about what we're doing.
How so?
I don't know. We talked about Schindler's List for like 15 minutes and then just straight up talked about the Holocaust for an hour. Like I don't
Well,
know,
Schindler's
man.
List
I
happens to
really
be
don't
about the
know.
Holocaust.
It's not even, I mean, it's about events that took place during that time period, but it's not about the Holocaust itself. I don't
I
know. I
mean,
feel
do you
like you're
not
saying a
find
lot
this
of stuff that's
conversation interesting?
no, it's interesting. I just don't know if it's YouTube worthy or friendly. I shouldn't say worthy, but like it's a little much.
I genuinely just don't understand where you're coming from.
He's a
It's
little
a
nervous because we're talking about a controversial subject.
I mean, it's probably it's not a controversial subject. It's the controversial subject.
It's really not that controversial.
No,
Bro,
it's
what?
past. It's history. It's what we went through. As bad as it was, Hitler's Nazis I mean, they changed how our lives turned out. They changed what rules can happen during war. A lot of the I forget what it's called. The It has a name, but the war crime laws and whatnot, and what's considered a war crime, they were all defined and changed after what Hitler did and what the Nazis did. So it's an important part of our history. As dark as it is, it's still important, and I don't see any reason why we can't talk about it and express our opinions on it. That's what we're here for. I don't know why you're. I mean, I don't know who you're gonna piss off. I mean, we get maybe 100 views at most on the video.
That's kind of how I'm feeling.
If one of those 100 people bitches about something we said because we're talking about the Holocaust, then they don't need to be fucking watching our videos. The whole point of this series is that I wanted to do this so we can express how we feel about certain things, certain subjects, and not feel restricted or held back based on, we're not preaching hate. We're not saying, oh, killing all those Jews was a great thing. Hitler's a genius. We're not saying that. Okay, we're not promoting hate. We're talking about it. We're expressing our opinions on it and how it made us feel. We're getting the inspiration from a movie, and then we're talking about real world events. Hey,
Okay.
would you guys say that we lost the Vietnam War?
Bro, considering we could have turned their entire country into a literal, like, uninhabitable wasteland, no. Did we stop and retreat or retrieve our troops? Yeah. Did anything really get accomplished in the area? I mean, somewhat, but I wouldn't say we fucking lost, dude. We've never really lost anything.
I'd say we failed the
Well,
mission.
there.
Yeah,
There was a
that's when we
goal and
should
that
have
goal was not
realized.
met.
That's when we should have realized to stay out of most foreign affairs and like petty
Oh,
conflicts.
we didn't learn our fucking lesson.
Yeah.
Well, we
You
haven't
think?
drafted since then. We haven't drafted people for a petty conflict as far as I'm aware since Vietnam.
Yeah, the fact they were so okay with having 18-year-olds go get like chopped to pieces and fucking beheaded in the jungle for some fucking bullshit like 700 hours away, that actually really pisses me off.
But a lot of people did have problems with that, and they were able to voice their dissent, and that's part of why I happen to like the U.S. a lot. Um, there have been a lot of mistakes made in the U.S.'s past, and a lot of atrocities have happened in the U.S.'s past, but somehow through it all, we have maintained an unprecedented, an unparalleled level of personal liberty. And the Vietnam War is an example of something that the U.S. government did that had a very strong opposition and a very vocal opposition during it. Um, and I'm not saying that the police forces and government didn't do any unethical things in response to protests, but in general, they were allowed to go on and happen. Um, that's just something that I feel when I think about the Vietnam War. Um, in the same vein, speaking of the United States violating people's liberties, um, during World War II, we had Japanese internment camps. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about because I feel like there's actually a lot of parallels between the 1940s United States and 1940s Germany. And I think that, what stopped the Japanese internment from turning into something more along the lines of the Jewish internment in Germany was simply the position that America was in versus the position that Germany was in as a country within the war. I think that the anti-Japanese sentiment within the United States was very similar to the anti-Jewish sentiment in Germany at the time. And just the fact that I don't even want to say we, but I kind of have to, we rounded up, hundreds of thousands of Japanese people and just threw them into internment camps or concentration camps, which is what they were, is kind of baffling to me that that happened within this country, less than 100 years ago. And I think that, if America would have started to lose the war and, these Japanese soldiers or these Japanese citizens would have no longer been fed, there would have been mass starvation, mass deaths, and it would have been very similar to what happened in Germany with the Jewish population to an extent. So yeah, we're lucky that we were able to win the war so that nothing bad happened to these prisoners, and I'm glad they were rightfully released and nothing happened to them. I also have a huge problem.
Yeah,
with
well, there's
some other.
there's definitely
Go ahead.
some counterpoints that I would have. I agree on the principle that like I think a lot of people in America at the time would have been okay with atrocities being committed against people in those internment camps. I think there are realities where America could have been losing the war and worse things could have been done to those people, absolutely. But there's definitely some very worthwhile distinctions between those camps and between what was going on in Germany. Just one of which would be the fact that the majority of the anti-Japanese rhetoric was incited by our country literally being attacked by the Japanese. There was racism, obviously, against Asians present before that, but it was primarily a sort of a paranoid response to an attack that, well, the Japanese country is attacking us, and these people are from there, so they must be in cahoots, which is irrational. But there's a difference between that and the anti-Semitism. It's also worth pointing out that before the mass starvation and mass killings were going on in the Holocaust, there was everything leading up to that was far more inhumane than the way the Japanese were treated in America. No, I don't think anyone was killed just for being Japanese in the U.S.
Well, that's a pretty you're taking a big risk by saying that, because that very well could have happened and you just don't know it. Like, that's something that can't just be glossed over. I'm sure people were killed in these camps.
I did some brief research, and people were not killed, at least not legally, or like in any sense.
People
that was
died in the camps, but I don't think they were along the lines of murdered.
Yeah, no, they like
Yeah,
there would have been a lot more
people that died in
outrage.
these internment camps.
The Japanese internment camps were documented intentionally by the U.S. government to try and save face. Now, did they try to coerce the photographers who went in to try to paint it in a prettier, happier picture than it really was? Yes, they did try to do that. But even the people who got in and didn't photograph exactly what they were told to photograph, no one was photographing people emaciated and dying. No one was photographing people being shot or being beaten. These people were basically treated like prisoners in the prison system. They were not physically violated. They were fed. They were not killed. So to say that, like, oh yeah, if we had started losing the war, we would have just started like absolutely just killing all of them, there is a big leap.
That's not what I said at all. I said we wouldn't have been able to feed them, and they would have most likely just all died.
Well, but you realize that, like, the feeding thing in Germany, like, those people were not being fed properly even when they could have been fed properly, and they were being killed even when they were being fed. They were just being shot left and right like cattle because that's how they were being treated. The Japanese in the U.S. were not treated anywhere similar to that. It was a civil liberties violation, absolutely, but human rights violation, not so much.
No, I mean, it was literally a human rights violation that was determined like legally later after the fact. But that's what
you're talking about the Japanese internment camps was a civil rights violation?
Yeah.
All right, so let me jump in and ask you a hypothetical question.
Me?
Yeah, you're president of the United States in 1945 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. What do you think's going to happen if you don't? I mean, we have a large Asian population in America at that time. So do you think that they were these American Japanese that were being put in internment camps, or were these
anyone
Japanese
who was
that were
Japanese?
captured in war?
It was both.
So at that time, if we're bombed by Japan and we're at war with Japan, obviously we're going to have paranoia to Japanese people in our population. And I hate to say that because it's basically racist and it's terrible, but this is where their head was at. My question is, were we wrong for creating the internment camps and putting them in there, or
Yes.
I would say so. I think most people would say so. I think it was a very emotional and irrational response and paranoid.
So what is the proper response when we just got bombed by Japan and we have a large Japanese population in our country? What are we supposed to do with those people? Just start keeping an eye on them, spying on them, making sure.
What do you mean? They're still like responsible for not committing crimes in the country, and if they're committing crimes, they're going to be found out and should like have due process and all of that. You can't just be like, all right, we're at war with Japan. You have Japanese blood in you, so you are now going to be basically a prisoner of war for like 5 years. Like what? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you. I'm trying to point out where our heads were at this time. At this point in time, the only country that ever attacked us prior to this was Great Britain back in the 1700s when we were doing the whole Revolutionary War and thing. So 1945, we get attacked by Japan. Obviously, America's going to be paranoid as hell of any, not just Japanese descent, but any Asian people in our population. And this is one of the darkest parts of our history, but what should we have done other than the internment camps?
Just let them live, and then if they commit a crime, arrest them. I mean, that's like the answer.
Okay, but I mean, the thoughts that's going through these people's heads are, what if there's spies? What if, they plant bombs in important, areas in our countries? So, I mean, I can see why they sent them to the internment camps. I don't agree with it. I think it's terrible, but I can see why. And this is the thing about it. This is not just an American thing too. This has been all throughout history, where anytime there's a war going on, people of that opposite country that are living in this country or the country that they're at war with, there's always been some kind of prejudicial hate towards them. And I just don't know. I'm trying to think, what is a solution? Obviously, my solution would be stop fucking going to war. It seems like we're always at war, but if we have to go to war with a foreign country, let's just say Russia at this point. I've heard a lot of stuff on the news about Russian spies. What are we supposed to do to prevent these Russian spies? And I'm doing a little finger.
That's just
marks.
Operational security, I would say. Like when you're operating a war, the spies from, for instance, Russia or from Japan are not going to be exclusively the race of that country that we're fighting with. Like, say there is a reality where we go to war with Russia and we're like, okay, we'll just lock up everyone who has any Russian descent in them. Well, then Russia could just start using Japanese spies. Like, they could just use other people who aren't of the same race. So the whole point is you just try to make yourself not spyable on, and that's really difficult to do, but it's what you try your best to in war.
Yeah. No, I'm just like I said, I don't agree with the internment camps, but I was like, what better solution would there have been for America to do?
It's
You
just
know,
that
I mean,
there's
we
not.
obviously didn't kill off millions and millions of Japanese people, but we did take Japanese people and put them in this camp because we were at war with Japan. What's a better solution? What should we have done?
Well, Will's
But
giving
I
you
don't
that
even see
answer.
that as a but I don't even see that as a solution. Like, how is that?
They
Like,
did in
there's
1945. They did. That's what I'm saying.
no,
We
no,
wouldn't do that now.
there's a reason that that was never replicated in any meaningful way. It's because it was just like it was insane. Like, that's insanity. You can't just be like, we know for a fact you're innocent, but because you live in this country and you have Japanese heritage, you are going to be imprisoned for 5 years. Like, that is so illogical. Like I said, they should have just like not even monitored these people, but if they commit a crime or, are working to help Japan in some way, then they should be held accountable for that. But they shouldn't just be immediately imprisoned.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree.
to try and like bridge with you a little bit, Kevin. If you're just saying that you can understand the mindset, yeah, I agree. I mean, I said a similar thing that like
No, I don't
it
understand.
was
I see why it happened. I see why because I take it and I see how people were feeling back then, and I can see why it happened. I don't agree with it. I don't understand it, but I can see why it happened.
okay. But just to go off of that, like, yeah, it
Yeah.
was though like it was a violation of those people's rights. Like a lot of these people were, generations down the line having lived in America, they had businesses. Those people lost everything essentially. Um,
Mhm.
I do think the U.S. tried to do some reparations to some of those people, but you can't replace those years that were lost. People's lives were ruined because of this. It was a horrible thing. But again, just a full circle, it's just not a one-to-one to uh, the internment camps and the concentration camps that were in Germany. Those
Yeah, but
other
nobody's
camps.
saying that though.
Well, I think you did make the analogy that um, you directly compared them and said that uh, that like if things had turned out differently, then those people in the Japanese internment camps probably would have starved, which is an insinuation that that's somewhat similar to what happened to the Jews who starved in Nazi concentration camps. And I'm saying it's not. It would not have played out the same because it didn't start the same.
Yeah, I don't think that 100, like, I'm not trying to compare them one to one. I'm saying like we're viewing America as, the morally superior
I
country
still do.
when in reality no, 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 I'm not talking about in terms of like Germany. I'm talking about in terms of we like a lot of people would be like, oh, during World War II we did absolutely nothing wrong, like nothing bad happened. No matter who we killed, who we bombed, who we interned, we did everything completely, as it should have been done. And I'm simply saying that a couple of different scenarios could have led to some like way greater degrees of human rights violations from America, in my opinion. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not
Sure,
directly comparing the two events.
sure, but also to be clear though, like a person who says that the Allied powers did nothing wrong, period, at all during World War II is just either completely uneducated or completely stupid.
I hear that a lot.
Well, I don't. I'm sorry for whoever you're
I don't know. I
talking
wouldn't
to.
say stupid. I'd say it's more naivete.
But yeah, naive. I mean, you just can't make a statement like that. That during the largest conflict in human history, an entire half of the world did nothing wrong. Like that's just on its face illogical and ridiculous. I do I not that's coming from someone who I do support like 90% of what the Allies did. I think that they were a morally superior force to the Axis powers. I think that uh, the world would be a lot worse off if the Axis powers had won. But obviously, there were some bad things that happened uh, on the Allies' side. And I guess really what I'd like to say, though, Will, is like, I don't want to shadow box with stupid people. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to have an argument or a fake argument with this person who says insane things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
like similar to
Yeah.
like a person who would say that this conversation that we're having right now is worthy of having our jobs lost. Like, I don't want to even acknowledge the existence of that person because they're, to me, like, bankrupt of logical thought. I don't feel the need to acknowledge that viewpoint all that much.
Thing is, when it comes to war, atrocities are done on both sides, whether you're winning or losing. Um, and this is why war is so terrible for anybody involved, but we keep finding ourselves in them for some stupid ass reason.
Well,
World War
it's been a long
II,
time
as
since
you
we've
said,
been
was
in
a
something
big
like World
part
War
of.
II.
Yeah, it's a big part of our history and a lot of other countries' histories. And I haven't done research into the stuff we've done to the Japanese in the internment camps or what we did with prisoners of war. I do know that when we go to war, we drop bombs in random places and not care who they kill, whether it's soldiers, adults, children, men, women. We are killing a lot of people. And I think dropping a bomb in a place that kills anybody who's not directly related to the war is an atrocity. And we've created that. We've done that. We have dropped bombs on factories that were probably run mostly by women and children.
What are we talking about right now?
Well, we're talking
I
about
don't
atrocities
fucking
on
know.
both sides of the war. And, like we had internment camps, yes. We dropped a nuke on 2 cities in Japan.
Okay, all
You
right.
know,
I have to step
we
in here. I want to save that specific conversation for a later video. That was actually something me and Alex kind of
Okay.
planned before this channel even was a thing. So, like Kevin, your mind is completely in the right place. Just save that later for
Save
later.
that
We're
for a
we're
later
go
video.
Yeah, we're gonna do a specific video on the bombings of Hiroshima and
Yeah.
Nagasaki.
That's not
If you're
going to
cool with
get
that.
our jobs lost.
It's not. It's
But no,
not.
it's the same thing too. Like when you're at war, the infantry at war. A German soldier's, he's shooting at American soldiers and British soldiers. He's doing what he's told. But, maybe he thinks he's doing the right thing because of what he's been educated on and taught from his country. And then we're killing German soldiers who had nothing to do with the murders of these Jews, but they're on the other side of our war and we're killing them. This is the things that I think about. War kills people that have nothing to do with the few people that are in charge and have their ideas and spread their ideas. It affects not just those people that come up with the ideas, but everybody involved in this country. I believe that maybe 90% of the Germans were probably pretty decent fucking people. They were just doing as they were told because they're soldiers, and they were following orders.
No, I agree with
Due to
that.
fear.
Yeah.
But the problem was the ones who have these hateful thoughts are the ones that are in power, the ones who are eloquent enough to, have a speech in front of hundreds of thousands of people and influence hundreds of thousands of people to your thoughts and your beliefs. And at the time, if you ask me, we could stop this war today, of all things, and all we have to do is drop a bomb. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's end this war. But nobody tells you that dropping that bomb's going to kill 100 people or 200 people. So that's not the stuff that we think about. And that's what bothers me the most about this is there's a lot of people that were not involved and did not have hate towards either Americans or Jewish people or Germans that ended up having to kill people because they were ordered to do so. And I'm very anti-war. I'm sorry, guys.
Well,
Anti-war is good.
see, I actually kind of have an issue with the phrase anti-war, because I think that war is oftentimes quite necessary. War can be senseless and meaningless in some cases, but there are also cases where if war was not waged, it would be a surrender to evil people. It's essentially the concept of self-defense. You can say, oh, I'm anti-violence, I'm anti-killing. But if that means that you won't defend yourself and your family if someone tries to kill you, that means that you won't hit back, essentially, then you're just going to be rolled over. In the same way that a country which does not fight for itself and for its values will be steamrolled over by more power hungry, more greedy, more evil styles of thought. Any country which decides that it's just going to start invading its neighbors and removing civil rights and just creating a worse world to benefit the mad greed and power trip of some psycho, that is something that has to be stopped. I wholeheartedly will defend that World War II was a just war in the sense that it was a defensive war against tyrannical, expansionist, imperialist, totalitarian regimes. It's fine to say you're anti-war, but I think it's necessary to acknowledge that sometimes it's necessary.
I somewhat agree with that and somewhat disagree with that. Like, I understand, yes, if there's a foreign country out there that's invading other countries and killing people for the sake of taking their land or taking their resources, yes, I see that it's necessary in that point. But then there's times where I feel us as Americans, we always seem to be at war. I remember several times in my lifetime that we've been fighting somebody. And it's hard to question and figure out, why are we fighting? Why are we involved if this has nothing to do with us? But it always seems like, and call me a conspiracy theorist, but it always seems like there are certain people in our government that prosper only when we're at war. You know, whether it be that they own companies that manufacture the stuff during war, or, you know, it's a war because we're trying to get oil from certain places. And I don't understand the whole point behind having to destroy people that have nothing to do with us. You know, I understand if you know, a president of a foreign country decides he wants to invade another country and kills innocent people, we should go and kill that president, not 100,000 of his men.
Well,
because they're just doing what they're told.
You can't just magically kill the leader every time. If that was possible, that's what we would do.
I know. I figure with is training and the technology we have and our Black Ops teams and our Army Rangers, we should be able to do this. But also, and this is totally off subject, but this is why aliens don't visit us, because as soon as they land, we'd probably kill them for being different.
No, we're the most advanced creatures in the universe.
We are not. We are not the most advanced creatures on. I believe we are cattle to another species.
That's not even close to being true, but
I'm joking. I don't mean that seriously.
Let me hop in here about what you guys were just talking about. So, Alex, in the same way that you view the term anti-war a little ridiculous because practically you will have to defend yourself at certain points, I view the whole, like, the United States is morally obligated to be the world's police as ridiculous in that same vein, because it's just like you can't solve every single conflict. You can't protect every single ally under every single circumstance. So you at least have to pick and choose your fights, because if you genuinely think like, no, we need to hop in and solve every single human rights violation, like, it's just not possible.
Yeah, so I mean, to be clear, that's not at all my claim. Like, I think that everything, really, Korean War and forward, all of those conflicts that the U.S. has been involved in have been certainly questionable. I think some are more justifiable than others. The thing is, like, I'm really not talking about those conflicts. I'm talking about necessary war. I think such a thing as necessary war can exist, and when you start talking about World War II, it's a whole different ball game from Iraq or Vietnam. It's entirely different. Now, the question of whether or not the U.S. should be the world's police is an interesting one that I probably have a differing perspective from you, but I think it's an entirely different conversation.
Are there people out there that believe that America should be the world police?
Oh, dude, fuck yes. That's one of the most common beliefs out there.
I mean, I'm one of those people to some extent.
Why do you think America should be the
All
police?
right, we'll go down
What
this
makes
path.
us what makes us know the right answer? That we should
Well,
enforce what we believe is right.
yeah, so I think the U.S. Has a pretty good track record in comparison to some other countries in terms of how we handle conflicts, in terms of how we run ourselves. Um, the conversation around World War II, it really hinges on that. I mean, World War II was the pivotal event for uh, the global society, and I think that fighting World War II was just. I think winning World War II was necessary. And in the post World War II world, you still had uh, communist and fascist regimes trying to rise up. I happen to believe that democracy is uh, superior to those systems of government. It results in a better society for everyone involved. And the U.S., um, based on uh, a lot of factors in terms of our natural resources and our geographic position and blah 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 blah, we happened to come out of World War II as the most powerful force in the world. Um, you, sort of set against the Soviet Union, but eventually the Soviet Union fell, and after the Soviet Union fell, the US is 100% the number one world power. So the question kind of becomes, well, it's not should America be the world police? It's if not America, then who? And your choices are essentially China or Russia. And I think if you can make the case that we are a more benevolent sort of peacekeeper than China or Russia would be, then that's all you need to do. And I think that's pretty easy.
So wait, you would say that the world is not capable of quote unquote policing itself?
I no, I think that someone is always chomping at the bit to essentially take over the world, if that makes sense. Not always as like all encompassing as like literally we have to own every single bit of territory. But if you look at something like Russia, Russia is expansionist. Okay, it wants to attack its neighbors. It wants to commit atrocities, and it is committing atrocities right now. China is the same way. It wants to. I mean, and China treats its own citizens like crap. Chinese citizens do not have nearly the same freedoms that American citizens do, and absolutely, if there was not, it's not about the little guys. It's really not. Like when you're talking about, oh, the world can't police itself. It's not about policing. It's about protection. There's big baddies out there who want to take over the world, and at one point it was Japan and Germany. Now it's Russia and China. But does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I see, I thought that's what NATO was for, was to police the world.
Well, NATO is basically America. If the U.S. left NATO, it would fall. It would be nothing.
Well, see, we need an organization like that that has members from every country of the world to police these other countries. I feel, and I love America. I'm not downing America, but I feel like we are a young country compared to a lot of the countries in the world. Who are we to say that we know best? Who are we to say that we should go here and say you can't do this, or you should be doing this? If
Well,
we go into a
why
country that's
not? I
been
mean,
around for thousands and thousands of years,
do you? I
and
mean,
it's worked for them for thousands and thousands of years, who are we to say you're doing it wrong?
so Kevin, you,
You
you
know,
think
and
that
it,
just because America is younger than a place such as China, that we can't make the claim that democracy is better than uh, dictatorship? I mean, I don't
no,
understand.
that's not what I'm saying. There are many countries in the world that have democracy,
Hmm.
but my thing is no one person, no one country should have that kind of authority. Like I said, we're young. Like I said, we're young compared to other countries. We're still figuring out our process. We're still making changes. We first came to this country, we killed a lot of things, lot of natives we killed. That didn't sound like the America that I know, but that's part of our history. We are too young of a country to be the ones to say this is how it should be done. We're doing it right. You're doing it wrong. I feel there should be, and I thought, like I said, I thought this is what NATO was for. Every country should come together, have representatives to say we should do it like this, or these are the international laws of war.
Those organizations do exist, and they have set laws of war.
Yeah, but like I said, it shouldn't be just one country. It shouldn't be America deciding, because basically, what is America right now? America is Donald Trump. What if Donald Trump doesn't like something and he decides he wants to do this? Or, the vice president decides he doesn't want to do this? Or Congress themselves have been bribed to do this and they want to do that. That's what I'm saying. We are not infallible. We are too young to be the people to say this is how it's done. And that's my opinion. And I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for that, but I feel it should be a conglomerate of people, not one specific country.
Well,
because maybe
those
Italy
conglomerates do exist. Again,
in Italy and not be in America.
I mean, those conglomerates do exist. You have things like the UN, but ultimately, what it comes down to is military might. There has to be a military force capable of taking on the most strong opponent that could exist, and that means so that means that there has to be an army that is capable of taking on Russia or China or North Korea or whatever army decides to rise up. And you're not going to be able to have and sustain an army like that as the UN's military force would not be capable of that, because your army needs to be integrated into your own society, if that makes sense. So, yes, there are groups of countries that deliberate and make decisions together. The United States happens to have the guns. We have the big guns, right? I guess I'm curious, so you think that we should not have the biggest military in the world. But that statement inherently means that you think China should.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Our military is what keeps us safe. The fact that we have such a large military is what keeps us safe. But who's to say somebody comes into power in America and says, hey, maybe we need some resources from this little country right here. They have a lot of iron in their mountains. Who's to say we don't become those people if we're the ones policing? There should be like I said, a conglomerate group of countries that say this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is how it should be done. And if there's a country in the world that disagrees with that and is attacking another country, then we step in. But we are only as strong as our weakest person, as they say. And I've met some really fucked up people in this country. God forbid they get into power.
Yeah, Kevin, that I haven't talked in 15 minutes, but that's actually a good point. We're only as righteous as our least righteous cause. So I kind of understand what you're saying there. I like that point. That's interesting. That's a good point.
And I love our country. I am so glad to have been born in America, but there are some things about this country I don't agree with, and one of them being our spending on military. Yes, I understand the need to have a big military, but the fact that we spend so much money on our military, what are we lacking in? Our educational system is dying. Our healthcare system is terrible, We are sacrificing in certain areas to build up this military to show our might so that we can go and, I don't want to use the word bully, but, enforce our beliefs on the rest of the world. And I don't agree with the fact that if there's a country out there that does things differently, that we should step in and say that's not right. Unless they're killing lots and lots of people like the Germans were doing, I kind of think we should stay out of it and mind our business. And this could be a big rabbit hole for us to walk down because of our differing opinions. But basically, my point is, no one person or country should be responsible for policing, because that's going to lead to corruption.
I think that you're taking sort of the prompt a little bit too literally.
Yeah, probably.
Like to say that the U.S. quote unquote should, and there's a lot of asterisks, okay, a lot of star after that with annotations at
Hmm.
the bottom of the page, all right. But my claim that the U.S. should be the world's police force does not mean that it should have sole say in everything that goes on around the world. It doesn't mean that we should go and step into every minor conflict that ever exists. What it means is that we should be the most powerful force in the world, and we should be present everywhere. We should have military installations in all of our countries that are allied with us, which there's a lot. And if you want to, you know, have some sort of measure of like the quote unquote righteousness of a country, just look at the kinds of friends that it has. America's allies, it is a massive conglomeration of peaceful first world countries. Essentially every first world country that exists is allied with the US, and we, even the ones that we aren't allied with, we have huge amounts of trade with. We are not some sort of like dictatorial police state that is stifling the world. We have created and fostered the most flourishing global economy that has ever existed, and we we are doing a pretty dang good job of keeping the world afloat.
Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, those are all allies. I mean, it.
So
Go ahead.
Russia
just said
right now would
Russia.
not be considered a first world country.
Oh,
He just said Russia.
I didn't hear you say Russia. Well, yeah. So
I didn't say Russia. It's not listed.
Oh.
Wait, what the fuck? It's definitely a first world country.
I googled it and it just says examples include. I mean, probably not all, but it includes the United States, Canada, Japan, Western Europe countries, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. It doesn't mention any Asian countries.
You could
so
probably
China and
call Russia a first world country, but
Would you call China a first world country?
Yes.
it's kind of debatable. It's sort of a first world country again. But there are serious issues with liberty there, and with income and stuff like that make it borderline a developing country versus a first world. But the bottom line is, like, yeah, you look at the democracies around the world, you look at the peaceful nations around the world, they're all friends with the US.
Okay, here we go. I skipped a line. First world countries are generally understood to be highly industrialized and developed nations with advanced economies, high standards of living, and strong democratic institutions.
Yeah,
So
see
might
that
be why they're
that
not included in
yeah,
this.
okay. So democratic institutions and standard of living is going to be a problem both for Russia and for China, because neither really has either.
Yep. So I missed that line. I didn't see that.
All good. I think there's a like you're free to criticize the way that the United States interacts with the world, but I just don't hear any real like viable alternatives or a real
I know that's the
acknowledgement
problem.
that there
There's
are.
no alternatives.
Okay.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. That's what I was trying to get at. Like, that's why I don't. I mean, there are no viable alternatives to policing the nations of the world. I do wish there was, because I really hate for all these. I hate seeing the news where all these countries are being bombed for whatever reason, or they're going to war for whatever reason. And I didn't mean to make this a long conversation. I was just trying to say that I don't think any one entity, as in country or person, should have that kind of power to police the entire world. There should be voices from everywhere deciding what's right and wrong.
Alex, I think you're turning Kevin more right wing.
I'm not trying to be. Yeah, I'm not political at all either. I don't agree with these things that kill people for no fucking apparent reason, other than greed or,
Well, right now,
industrial whatever.
the right wing is more generally against America being involved in the world.
Well, you know what I mean, like traditional, like 2010 Republican
Neocon
ideals
Bush
about
era,
world
yeah.
police. Yeah.
No, the difference there is that, I mean, they were definitely more extreme, and like I certainly have more ambiguous opinions about the Middle Eastern wars than the Bush era conservatives would have. Uh, but yeah, I think a lot of the conversation around uh, the Allied powers and the U.S. in general, there's just sort of a missing piece of the conversation, which is that compared to the other world powers, we really genuinely are like head and shoulders in moral stature versus other world powers. It's just evident. It's self-evident.
Alex, what'd you think of the movie? On a scale of 1 to 10.
That's a tough one. Um, 6.5. It's good.
What about you, Will?
I liked it. It's just I don't think it was necessarily packaged as well as it could have been.
Well, I mean, we claimed early on in the video that this was proclaimed to be one of the best movies ever made. And I think it's a great movie. I think back in '93, it was probably one of the best movies ever made. But nowadays, it doesn't seem like it would be as far up on the list now because there's been a lot of other great movies that have been released since then. Will, what would you rate this movie?
I would say non-biased purely as a film, probably a 7 or 8. It's very well done, very, very well done actually. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of my personal enjoyment, I did the first half was boring, second half made up for it, but I'd say personal rating is probably like a, you know, 5 or 6. I may watch this one more time in my life before I die, but like I think it deserves to probably be like a 7 or 8 objectively.
I personally would give this a 7.5. Um, being that the subject matter was interesting to me, I followed the movie very easily. The acting was pretty decent, but I gave it a 7.5 because I don't think it aged well. I don't think it has as much emphasis or oomph, as you'd say, as it did back in '93. Nowadays, it's just a classic movie that was well done back in the day. So I'm about a 7.5 on this one.